Okay, let's do the risk plan. We can look at this a little bit, and the communication plan. Okay, risk management. This is the conducting the overall planning, the whole process. It formalizes what I was talking about informally in the last chapter. Okay, so what are we going to do here? Now, where did I get this from? I got the chapter content is almost always right from the, directly as I can get it from the course text. So that's easier for you to connect over. Sometimes there's some additional reference, and I wanted to point this out here. There's a lot of discussion on risk in PMI. And I'm going to give a little bit of information on PMI later in the course. Project Management Institute. Is anybody a member of that institute? I'm going to present a little bit about it. In the area of project management, they're the 800-pound gorilla in the room, I think, of inputs to this. They have various certifications also that some companies feel are important, some companies not. And I can, reference this. They put this out every couple of years. I have a bunch of these guides. But the notion here that I wanted to make also is the author is connected with these folks, but not in an official way, really, but he teaches some of their courses. And so the book structure and the guide to the Institute knowledge base and the Institute itself are related. So that's good news for you in a sense. If you need to go and get a certification, the topics in the book that we're covering will make it a little bit easier to learn what you need for the certification tests. Okay, that's intentional by me. Now, project risk plan. This is the formal project risk plan allows for the manager to be proactive regarding what can go wrong. Sometimes when you're analyzing project risks, you can eliminate some risks by identifying them and taking action proactively. Okay. Now, and this, like I say, the textbook author, this is an example of the connection. The 6 points, the 6-point process of PMI, Project Management Institute, is just basically directly taken from that and attributed properly by the author. Let's look at these steps, the step-by-step. So you want to, step one, create a comprehensive list of potential project risks. That's where you conduct brainstorming session. It's a good way to do that. And you try to capture the ideas from everybody. As I mentioned before, you don't want to have people coming in later saying, well, I could have told you that. That doesn't count. In the beginning here, we want to get everybody together, brainstorm through this, and everybody has a chance to input. Okay, it's the second step. Prioritize the identified threats to the project and determine the time, effort, staff, and money to devote to either preventing or mitigating each. So you can, like I said, you can proactively get rid of some of the risks up front, determine how probable it is that each risk will become a reality. And then, as I say, you prevent it, you take steps to prevent or mitigate the risk. If a risk has been identified and you have the ability to prevent its occurrence, do so. Okay, for example, you could have a risk identified that an item is very critical to the plan, to accomplish with the plan. And then what you would do would be to identify alternative suppliers with appropriate actions. Let's say, hey, are you up for one other question, Austin?
Yes.
Okay. Let's say that the windows, it's very critical. They wanted to close off the building before it got cold, much as they could, the Southside Commons. It's a lot of windows. So windows are highly critical. There's a lot of them. What would this mean in the sense of, say Anderson Windows was your prime supplier? What would you need to do according to the prevention and mitigating risk here, as it's stated in my written commentary here? How would you try to mitigate that risk by something you could do with your supply chain, with your suppliers?
Yeah, so I would first explain to my primary, say you said Anderson, that we need it done as soon as possible. And I would probably try to arrange a backup supplier if they couldn't complete the task on time.
Absolutely. And why not? Why not do that? I mean, it's good. That's exactly right. So often you can do that. When I work in the defense industry, it's sometimes hard to get backup suppliers because certain types of components of weapon systems are rather unique. But when you can do it with something that's rather straightforward, like say Windows systems, then that helps. That's a way to mitigate the risk on the front end. And that kind of thinking is important for project managers to have. So you can't always do it, but when you can do it, then consider contingencies. Step 5, if the risk becomes a reality, what will we do? And if the risk is a high priority, high probability, high negative impact, you'll want to identify multiple contingencies. Okay, so contingencies, and then finally, establish a trigger point. This is the point at which the risk becomes enough of a reality, you're close enough, that the project manager needs to trigger the contingency. Like say with the windows we're talking about, they were due in November 1st, to get them in before the winter. They're not there November 15th, the supplier, well, we'll get them there tomorrow. They'll get, they're just leading you on. November 30th, they're not there. Bam. That's a trigger point. We're going to supplier B. You can just, remember that example if you want. That's the point where you as the project manager, I'm not sure they use this phraseology, but trigger point means, pull a trigger to do it. Let's look at reserves, which is another way to help the project achieve its results. And that is by building in a contingency. This is time and our budget. It's all probably more largely associated with budget than with time that have been identified. And once you should estimate the reserves based on the level of risk of your project that you've identified in the project. And this is what contingencies look like. This is a simplified budget. I think I have another example at the very end. But say you have your line items and a 10% contingency and then the budget. Has anybody worked on a project where they use the contingencies like this? Who's worked on it? Who wants to pick a project? All right, so you ready? You want to help me out with this? Name it. I don't care if it's painting your room or something. I mean, think of a project. It doesn't have to be complex. What would a project be you've worked on? It doesn't have to be fancy industry project. Anything.
I worked. Does that have to be real, or am I making a project up?
Well, let me put it this way. If it's realistic and believable, make it up, go for it. Because I just want to use it to make the point of how contingencies work. So dream up a project.
I worked in a project where we replaced the manual workstation with automated ones.
Okay. Along the way, could you have were there any risks that you could identify that would make the project a little more complicated?
Yeah, so we were running on a fixed timeline by when the workstations would be automated, because we had to stop productions for a little while when that switch was happening. So if we did not get that up and running on time, the whole production line would be lagging and behind on schedule.
Okay. Now, so you worked with the people, so you working like 8 a.m. till 5, shift 8 to 5?
Yes.
Okay. Now, contingency, say you're falling behind. You had say the robot end effector, the robot hand needed some additional engineering, something like that. It delayed it. So that's going to cause you to have to do 2-shift work. 2-shift work is more expensive. You're going to add resources. And that's going to, like I said, almost always goes over the budget, even though that's time. So in here, the contingency, say 10%, what was the rough budget for your project?
$250K.
I'm sorry, the overall budget for the automation, was it like $2 million or $1 million or like?
Yeah, it was up in million. I would say roughly 2 million.
Say it's $2 million?
Yes.
So if you wanted to put a contingency in of 10%, okay, that'd be 200K, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how this would be your line. What would be a line item here is to remove the old equipment, to install, to debug, check out the software, all these things, all these line items. Down here comes your contingency, and that gives you your total budget. Now, the corporate financial people may push back on a 10% contingency. That, you've got to be willing to negotiate a little bit here, but you want to have it in there. You did your contingency. Now I'm going to just speak plain to you here. Contingency can save your tail. And it's not inappropriate to have it because it's not a perfect world. You're putting in here a reserve for unanticipated. It's part of understanding risk. And part of understanding the risk process is the use of contingency. Okay. If you had that, if you had that contingency, hey, we're going to go double shift. We're going to add resources, and that's going to make up that time. So we hit our end time. That's the way to think about it. Okay. So that risk is handled. Thank you for that example. Okay. Now, a risk register is a planning tool. It's getting, some things you can mitigate, you can get rid of by working your way through them, but you're not going to get rid of everything. So things that are identified that you can resolve in thinking about risks. Okay, so we got rid of those. We're still left with some. That's in plain English, the author's thinking on this and the way you think about it. Brainstorm, identify, get rid of what you can. Now we're still left with some. All right. Now, the risk register helps you identify, there's the next slide will show that. What the risk is. This is very important. Who owns it? There's going to be a person is going to be responsible here. Not having that defined is not good. Then other factors that you need. Now here's probably not the greatest example, but it's of a risk register, but not a bad one. Here's one that the project we've been working on has this pop up. Asbestos being uncovered. This is not good. So it's what happens. Here's the possible effect on the project, mitigation, who's the owner of it, and a target date. So these are risks. When you're working in some factories, for example, where you're modernizing, but it's old factory, these things can happen. So that's a risk, and you put it down. Bam. This is how to think about it, though. And here's the rating on the risk likelihood rating. You can see now there's different formats for this, and you can use what you're most comfortable with. But that's what the risk register looks like. It's laying all out so you can see it, be aware of it, who's responsible if it comes up to be needing action, what the mitigation is, so forth. It's structured. You don't want to get caught under analyzing risk potential as a proper good quality manager, project manager. You need to deal with risk, face it, get a plan for it. I like to structure tabular structure because it's easy to work from. At any rate, additional comment. If I don't finish, I'm still going to stop at one because it's okay. You can. This is an add-on. You can transfer risk utilizing insurance. Okay. In fact, construction, like we were talking about before on the south side, you can insure against certain types of risks with construction projects. But there's different types of project, different types of contracting that has different types of insurability risk to it. Is with fixed price subcontracts, project managers essentially know exactly what the cost of that part of the project will be. So Samantha, you game here. Have you ever had? Do you have a? I hope this isn't too nosy of a question. Do you have a car that you drive?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. Now, do you ever get it repaired?
Yeah.
Take it into the shop, and then go take it into the shop, and you probably ask for an estimate, right?
Yep.
Okay, and you get a number, right? It's going to be $100. That's the estimate to do something, fix the carburetor, whatever, put a new muffler on. Now, it turns out it's the muffler job or it's a carburetor job, and it's some of the bolts are tough to get off. It's it just took longer than we thought, and then the guy comes back to you and says, "Oh, we have a little more trouble now. I want you to pay me a little bit more." You're not going to settle for that, right? That's a fixed
No.
price contract. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the deal. Some contracts are that way. You don't absorb any unknowns there. My mechanic, I have a mechanic on South Side. He says, I say, what's it going to cost, John? He says, plenty, and that's only an estimate. I think wisecrack. That's just, if your mechanic does that and you don't know him, be worried. At any rate, time and materials contracts do not transfer risk. You hold that risk. Let's say you have a friend, Samantha, you're going to get the tires changed. You want to change the tires. You order them online, whatever. You have a friend that knows how to jack the car up and so this. And they say, well, that's going to be time and materials. I'm going to charge you $10 an hour, $20 an hour, whatever it is. And I'll either supply the tires or you supply them, in which case I'll just charge you time. Something else happens there. It's an older car and some of the bolts are rusted on. Trouble. It's had trouble doing the job. So you thought, well, you chatted over it. You thought maybe this would be, $40, $50, $20, whatever. Now there's problems. So instead of costing $20, it costs $40. You see how the risk stays with you on time and materials. And when you're a project manager and you're subbing out work, which you're going to be doing no matter what, you got to get the notion of how these two vary and the concept of transferring risk. Okay. And that's the transferring of risk is done. Well, it's done by buying insurance, like for construction project, but it's also transferred by fixed price subcontracts, not transferred by time and materials. Everybody got that? So block that into your head. Now, communication plan. This is where you want to basically set up what level of communication it should occur, how often it should occur, who owns the communication, and to whom it should be addressed. Because and I get a fair amount of feedback from companies and so forth on this, because it's so much easier to cause communication to occur with various digital applications. You need to think this through. So frankly, that you're having the right level, the right amount. You're turning the dial in an appropriate way. And this is an example of this, where you have basically what it is, who's responsible for doing it, who owns it, the vehicle, and then the frequency, and to who does it go to. There's a definite trend, strong trend, and I think you see it in your own work, but it's certainly an industry trend, is to have the information, the communication that's desired, provided on demand. As the applications to be able to do this have improved, it isn't necessarily your obligation to, with high frequency, inform people. You set up the system so that on demand, they can find out what they need to know at their own initiation. This has the benefit of not overloading managers, middle managers and executive level with too much communication from the people that are doing the operational work with projects. You said you can find it out on demand, and unless you want me to frequently send you updates, then do it that way. So that's to share it, that shared drive method. Now, if for routine communication, details such as who should be CC'd and what the connecting the dots of communication. This is important that you, starting out in particular, that you get this settled with your first level manager, so that what goes to that person, to him or her, from, as you're sending your report, say to a client, is very clearly known and agreed to. You don't want to be caught in a situation where your supervisor says, why didn't you tell me about that communication? I got blindsided when I got a question from the client, didn't know what was happening there. So this is not a trivial point, especially starting out. And then there's various applications that can be used here to do this. This isn't the greatest example, but here, this contingency is rather significant, but this type of project, I don't know that it's not a project I worked on. Probably has a fair amount of risk in some components of it. I just put that into to reinforce the notion of contingency as a risk buffer.